Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome Alan Moran from Victoria. Welcome, Alan.
Hi, Annie.
No worries. Pleased to have you, Alan. The weather is kind here. I don't know that it'd be too much different in Melbourne.
No, it's pretty pleasant here. Cool, cool for summer anyway.
Okay, no worries. I'm going to cut across to your website, Alan, just to bring up your latest article. The last thing we need now is more costly climate virtue signalling. Now, this is in regard to new government initiatives and essentially doing, as I read it, the biddings of the environmentalist movement. They're not actually thinking. What they're doing is responding to pressure that, in my view, is generated through multiple forms. One is obviously the institutions are teaching our children, our teachers, our educators. They're teaching them about this. Our media is continuing to foster this environment and pursue it and push it as public opinion. And then finally, of course, you've got the activists within communities who are certainly promoting a an environmental philosophy of the catastrophic end, essentially, of the world as we know it because of climate change. And and to me, it's like a religion. It's a new religion, but it's a religion of certainly of fear and not necessarily founded on observable fact. Your thoughts, Alan?
I think that's pretty spot on. I'd add another force in there, and that is those who may gain financially from the sorts of measures we're implementing. That is, for example, the suppliers of renewable energy, solar energy, and wind energy,
Hmm.
who are largely responsible for funding the media and the social media to
Hmm.
promote this message of doom.
Hmm.
And as you say, there's a confluence of various factors in there. There's the capture of the educational institutions by the Green Left,
Hmm.
who sort of tortured the minds of our children and grandchildren.
Yep.
Basically, made them feel as though this is an imminent disaster. When, of course, if there is a problem with global warming, it's a trivial problem.
Hmm.
Uh, and we basically and it's forcing governments to either promote those same policies or to try to deflect the criticism by other policies, and that's somewhat the position of the Australian government at the moment, which is trying to stress that it will invent all these new gee whiz and fund all these new gee whiz measures like carbon capture and storage and like
Hmm.
energy from hydrogen and molten salt and God knows what.
Hmm.
Basically, all of these things it's putting a lot of money into, in addition to the 1.5 to $3 billion a year that it's putting into subsidies for renewables. Those subsidies, of course, have created the impasse we have with a far less reliable electricity system now, and one which has a wholesale price twice what it was just about 2 or 3 years ago. So the government is being pressed along that like that. We don't have, and I think I made the point, and it's possibly a bit unfair to the present government. We don't have any Trump uh, possibility here. We don't have a man who will stand up and say this is all nonsense. We're not going to do this ourselves. Besides which, the Chinese and the Indians and everybody else who say they're going to do things aren't going to do anything. So it makes no difference whatever we do. We don't have anyone who has the self confidence or the capacity, or perhaps even the knowledge, to promote that kind of view in Australia. And we basically need somebody. We are very reliant upon low cost power, cheap
Hmm.
energy.
Hmm.
Um, we to actually promote our standard of living. It wasn't long ago when we sort of thought, well, what we need to do, we've got all this cheap energy, we need to leverage off this cheap energy with all sorts of industries like aluminium, and
Hmm.
we even had wind farm blades earmarked at one stage, uh, forest products and benefication of ores and all that sort of business. That all seemed to a reasonable way forward for Australia, but I mean, it's a laughable way forward now because we no longer have cheap power. The only reason we don't have cheap power is because the governments have made it very expensive with the regulations and discouragements to coal-based power, which is the source of whatever cheapness we once had.
Yeah, that's an interesting phenomena to observe, Alan, because to me, what I see is going on is one is that the government is promoting green policy, and they're actually implementing green policy. That's indisputable. That's what they're doing. They're implementing green policy, but at the same time, the beneficiaries of green policy are actually the multinationals, because by putting all their eggs in one basket in a sense of shortening the supply of electricity, the multinationals, the industries that are owned, are exploiting that for their own increased benefit. And of course, the increased cost of electricity affects every single household. So that's inflationary. So it's an erosion of the spending power of the, if you like, the middle class, the lower classes of the Australia, the low income earners. That's really what I'm trying to say, not lower class, lower income earners. Um, they're the ones who are directly affected by these increased prices, inflation, to the advantage of, if you like, the multinationals. So the this is where, to me, the nexus of, if you like, totalitarianism comes together. One is that the activists are sponsored by foundations. Get Up is sponsored by billionaires, Soros and others. You've got the green activists are sponsored by these billionaire foundations, the huge multinationals, and the benefits of the outworking of the policy are also the same people. It works, that come together. They actually use the dialectic. I don't know if it's Hegelian or whatever it is, dialectic, but the dialectic actually works together to force and actually strip, if you like, the income base, the assets, whatever it is, off the middle class, and it all goes into the hands of the ultra rich. To me, I talk about monopoly capitalism as clearly distinct from free enterprise. To me, they are two separate systems, and to me, the liberals, whether you want to call them conservative or not, are doing the dirty work of this monopoly capitalism. They're doing it, and so are the Greens. That's my take on it, Alan.
Well, I've got some sympathy with that take, but I would differ from it in some respects.
Mhm.
You're quite right to say that this is being funded by the Soroses of this world and others. Uh, is, I don't think it's true to say that monopoly capitalism is gaining from this. What? Well, there isn't much monopoly capitalism, but there are big companies, multinational companies. Um, they're basically trying to protect themselves from it. You're quite right that they aren't going to lose. Basically, they're going to whatever the policies the government decides upon, they will produce to those policies. But it's not really to their advantage to do so, except to the extent that they're protecting themselves. If you look at CEOs and chairmen of companies, all they can see is some very strong pressures from consumers who are telling them that they've basically got to produce products which are greener, and B, from their own shareholders who say, listen, because of this consumer backlash we're getting, the value of your shares will be less than you think it's going to be. We're going to be pulling money out of your shares unless you can persuade us that you are abiding by these trends, which many of the investment community think are real trends. And therefore, you have the BHPs and the Rios and various other peoples of this world going along with measures that reduce the amount of carbon emissions, not only of their own products, but of the products that they sell and that are used by other people. So rather than it being an exploitation by monopoly capitalism, I think it's that they're caught in the same vice as the rest of the people. They're basically saying, "Oh well, we have to protect our main job is protect the shareholder wealth." And this is under pressure from two forces: one from consumers who are demanding us use less energy or less greenhouse producing energy, and from our shareholders or shareholder base, which means the superannuation companies, which means us, basically, who are also demanding that we do the same thing, and therefore they're abiding by their market demands in ways that they see or they think will maximize the wealth of their companies. Now, whether that turns out to be true or not is doubtful. I mean, certainly, I agree with you that the bottom line is that we, communities as a whole, are very much disadvantaged and impoverished by these policies.
That's exactly right, Alan. And the fact is that whether we identify the monopoly capitalist as a person who's got a title or as it's a structure, an organisation, a shareholder, and of course the yes, the superannuation funds are there, so are the big hedge funds and all that sort of stuff that are there, the players behind that, to exploit whatever situation in order to take advantage of it. So we don't have disagreement on that. Identifying the culprits or identifying who the outworking of policy beneficiaries are, to me is only a matter of really of labels. In a sense, they are essentially the same people. The ultra rich will continue to exploit the situation, whether it's through their hedge funds, their superannuation funds, or whatever. Or I might call it, say, central banks. It's the same thing. Those that actually put the money on the table to exploit the situation in order to increase the predicament. And of course, the small players, they're the ones that are getting hammered. So it's a real quandary, but it's being taken advantage of, and that's really what I'm suggesting. Is this whole predicament is being taken advantage of? Legislation that the government is bringing out in order to appease the noise is is actually to the advantage of this monopoly situation. And to me, the function, if you like, the justification for government in the first place is not to make very, very wealthy people more wealthy. The justification for government is actually to provide an environment where the individual is actually secure in his own little bit of heaven, and that his land is secure, his property is secure, and that he can just get on and live his life. And the justification for government is that. And yet, what we're seeing is that the actual outworking of government is playing into the hands of, I'll call them monopoly capitalists, whether they're hedge funds or central banks or whatever. I'm identifying them as that particular group of people, but who also have the advantage of being able to hire guns for hire, and I would call the green movement guns for hire, because it's through those very foundational funds, the Carnegie Institute and all the others that go with it. They're the ones that are actually promoting the green revolution. Your thoughts, Alan?
Well, I think actually there's a lot in that.
Yeah.
One of the facets of the endowments that are made, and you can think of even our local ones like the Maya Fund,
Mm-hmm.
is basically they're made by men and women, but mainly men who've made a fortune and want to do good, and they deliver this endowment, which is hands out money at arm's length, but invariably it gets captured by the green left. I mean, you know, the farces, the Rockefeller Foundation, for example, you mentioned Carnegie. Rockefeller Foundation is a major financier
Mm-hmm.
of people who are basically trying to get rid of oil. And yet the Rockefeller Foundation is synonymous with oil. That's where Rockefeller made his money.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happens with the other foundations, that one way or another, even when the bequester puts very strict limits on what sort of things can be invested in, inevitably the people who float to the top, who basically running those organizations, turn out to be green left, and they are, most of them have a lot of compassion and for the poor, but one way or another the money gets funneled into these antinomian, we might call them anti-human endeavors, and will impoverish us rather than enrich us. I wouldn't. You seem to talk about the big businesses as a class of companies, and I don't really see them like that. There certainly are the Soroses of this world who are very much part of the issues that you're mentioning. I see from other big businesses, men and women who have clawed their way to the top of these companies, don't know very much about politics, certainly can't argue politics, but do know how to run companies and make a lot of money out of them. And they see their role as more defensive than trying to make even more money to push these income sapping arrangements like green energy
Mm-hmm.
to their own advantage. They're basically looking to see whether they can could survive in a world which has got a lot more interventions in it than it had, uh, only a few years ago, and we don't really have any class of people saying, look, this is all not only is it rubbish, it's reprehensible and hurting us, and we've got to push back. There's no pushback, unfortunately. We've got just a soft blancmange of companies who are just trying to survive, and if they can make some money out of it, they will. We do have a hard edge of companies who say, listen, this is terrific, we're going to shame the government into giving subsidies to these things which will enrich us, and there are certainly a lot of companies doing that.
Hmm.
I don't see it as a sort of a cabal of the big business or the big banks or the big anything else who are all pushing in the same direction to screw us, kind of like a Marxist type view. I know you're not a Marxist, but a Marxist type view which they're seeking to impoverish people and enrich themselves. I don't see that a grand conspiracy along those lines, but it certainly is occurring that we are regulating ourselves into much lower standards of living. Companies themselves, uh, if they're not advocating this, and some are, they're acquiescing in it and seeing how they can survive in this situation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your candidness, Alan, and I know that where we're going is difficult area. It is a difficult area. Rockefeller, you mentioned his foundation. As I understand it, the Rockefeller Foundation was instrumental in getting universities to move away from natural medicine to chemical-based medicine, of which he invested heavily in that industry, and he actually exploited it through the universities to the point where if you like, chemical medicine is are the only courses being done in universities, and you have to actually go outside of the university environment to go into natural medicine, to go into naturopathy, and things like that. I find that, to me, that he's consistent. That at least the foundation was consistent. They pursued a particular policy through the universities. The end result was, of course, that they've got this essentially a monopoly on medicine, that if you don't use the conventional medicine, chemicals, and everything that goes with it, you go to alternative natural medicine, and you're considered a spook. You're considered a bit of a mug. What are you doing? You take this pill and it sorts everything. He benefited by it, no matter which way he turned. When he first purchased the pipeline to gain a monopoly, he has benefit, and to me that's the no different with the other predicaments that are going on. Okay, there are middle people, and they can be the upper echelons of management within the industry, and they're just trying to hold. I spoke to a CEO yesterday, contact, and he could see the writing on the wall with this, not only the coronavirus but the share market and that. And yes, he knows he has to consolidate. They have to remove debt. They have to, if necessary, cut back work hours. They have to put things in place just to maintain the viability of the company. So I understand the CEO as he's got to juggle this whole thing that's put in front. What I'm talking about is a level above the CEO. It's actually, yes, 5%, 8%, 10% shareholder equity in any company really dominates every company. I did a thing, was it about a year ago? I had a look at who owns the four Australian banks, and you've got the Hong Kong based bank that I think is British controlled, and you've got two American, is it City Chase Manhattan, whatever, and JP Morgan. You've got three holders, and they hold about 25% of all four banks in Australia. They totally dominate Australian banking policy, totally dominate it. And it's that level of control. If you're the bank and you're issuing credit and your company happens to be, I know how Santos was operating when I was there, and they would every year go to the bank cap in hand, we need to have 1,000 million or 2,000 million or whatever, bank card basically, to go and work through our projects for this year, and this is how we're budgeting, and this is what we're doing. It was the banks that actually controlled policy of that company. And it's, to me, it's no different. Our big four banks, the banks in America, they're controlling policy of companies. And if it's not green enough, they can put the squeeze on. Don't tell me they can't. They've got control of this whole situation. I know there's a book there called the creature from Jekyll Island, and it's to do with the establishment of the Federal Reserve. I think 1913, private banks established the Federal Reserve. They control, basically, in my view, the whole monetary policy in America. And of course, the Bank of England was a private institution. The central banks in Australia, what are they? Controlled by these same banks. To me, this is the top of the tree. This is where the actual control is taking place. No doubt you've got other thoughts, Alan.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's true at all.
Okay.
Uh, I don't see the banks as being that powerful. I certainly don't. I certainly dispute the numbers you have there that the Australian banks are owned by foreign bankers. HSBC may well be, but that's a Hong Kong bank.
Yeah.
Uh,
British control though. Lord such and such
maybe,
is the
maybe
chief.
it is. I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
whether it's British controlled or not, but it certainly
Yeah.
isn't a very big bank in Australia. The Australian banks basically don't lend. I mean, in your days in Santos, they may well have lent Santos. They don't lend any money like that. They're in the housing markets now. They're in the small loans. If you're a big company, you either go onto the U.S. stock exchange and do it,
Hmm.
or maybe go to Japan or China or whatever for that kind of development capital. Australian banks are very, very risk averse
Yeah.
nowadays. So when they say, "Oh, we're not going to lend," Westpac or whatever says, "We're not going to lend to any more coal." Well, who cares? They don't lend to any coal anyway. They
Hmm.
don't. They don't make that kind of loan.
Yeah.
Uh, they're just not in that business
Hmm.
level. Uh, I don't really see the banks as being the top of the tree or the puppeteers in the way that you do. I see them as being fairly competitive with each other. There must be 100. Well, there is 100 banks worldwide of major status, all of whom are actually competing with each other
Hmm.
uh, as well. So I don't really see the banks as being, the kind of central force as they are. I just see them as one of a lot of forces within the capitalist economy, which are being pressed along in directions which they may or may not want to go to, but one way or another, they have to go in those directions.
Hmm.
The reason why they say make these statements that we're not going to lend to green things is because their PR people tell them that if you lend to green things, people will close their accounts and move to another bank.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true or not, but the CEOs of the bank perceive it to be true,
Hmm.
and therefore they act accordingly.
Yeah. I've got a book. I've got a couple of books on our website that actually go. I guess they sort of build the case of what I've just said, and I will put links on this video at the end of it so that those that are interested can at least read where these authors have done a bit of homework on it. Um, and I appreciate where you're coming from, Alan, and that to me is why this forum is so important because there are diverse points of view, and to me the point, the critical point is in the outworking in the outworking in society and communities where the rubber hits the road. If what I'm saying, suggesting is this is the narrative, this is closer to the narrative than say what you're suggesting, then it'll be observable. People will see it. And to me, that's the key to it is that, okay, you've got another point of view. And when the rubber hits the road, is it observable what you're actually highlighting? To me, that's the validity of it. If you like, it's the scientific method, not the abstraction, but the scientific method. You actually test it and prove it. And I think that to me, that's what's on the table here is, well, let the audience ask, let them look, let them assess themselves. Are these things actually being controlled and outworking? So okay, another point of view, and it could be equally as valid or even more valid, and so be it. But that's what I'm placing on the table, and I think that that's really, really important in our current situation with the stock market lunching, with Italy basically in quarantine, Japan not far behind. That Sydney, I see the parents in the schools in Sydney are calling for complete quarantine of Sydney. Um, these things are quite significant phenomena, and to me, my concern is that the, if you like, the economic system may be lunching in front of us, but also this sort of medical lockdown that's going on. These things are, to me, are quite concerning because it's not as if they haven't been predicted. You do a search on FEMA, FEMA, FEMA camps in America under Barack Obama. He was building hundreds of them. And what are you building without a requirement? The requirement is for medical emergency, just like today. What did Barack Obama know, 5, 10 years ago that we didn't know? What did he know? What did he know? Why did he build basically isolation camps for just such a medical emergency? And to me, that's the concern that I've got, that this thing that's unfolding in front of us it's actually almost got design behind it, and that is my major concern. Yeah, yeah. Alan, your closing thoughts and comments, please.
Well, yeah, I think the virus that we have now is going to have a massive effect on the world economy.
Hmm.
If Barack Obama had some perception that this was going to happen 5 or 8 years ago, well, he's a smarter man than I thought think he is.
Hmm.
Because basically, if we do have these isolation camps, we're probably going to need some of them in the future. And the Chinese have done so in a very ad hoc way, in which we actually think looks quite brutal.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we don't know the outplay of the coronavirus. We do know that it's going to kill a lot of people. We don't know whether it's kind of just another sort of kind of flu, which we get and which we become accustomed to having every year or so.
Hmm.
Uh, but certainly the near term, and when I say near term, I'm talking not just the next few days, I'm talking at least 6 months, is that it will be massively disruptive to economies, will effectively mean quite a marked reduction in everybody's living standards, and could actually cause a reversal of the kind of world integration that we've seen, which is, for good or for ill, has actually increased our living standards, but in many people's eyes made us far too dependent upon China
Hmm.
uh, as a source of not only motor cars and steel and aluminium, but pharmaceuticals and other things as
Everything
well.
else, yeah.
So there is a major revision going on about, or not necessarily a revision, a rethink going on about how we run economies right now. And to me, one of the first things we should be doing is an area which I've been looking at quite closely, which is the energy area. Is
Hmm.
basically saying, well, whatever else we do, let's not continue doing this self harm.
Yeah.
But we've been doing with energy by substituting cheap fossil fuels um, for the renewable goods, and let's get back to something which will give us a bit of an edge and help us raise our living standards rather than depress them.
Yeah. No, very valid point, Alan, and I concur with what you're saying, that Australia has to look internally to start sorting its problems out, its own problems, and the economy, the energy is just one facet. We have been deconstructed since 1975, I think it was the Lima Declaration, and our industry has gone offshore. And now look at us, we are really exposed. And so to me, Australia needs to turn internally. It needs to look at itself and establish reliable, sustainable, affordable sources of energy, of water, and of industry, and most importantly, of food, to make sure we've got that, because without a full belly, you can't do anything. Alan Moran, this has been a very interesting forum, and I really, really appreciate you coming. Thank you so much.
Good to chat, Arnis. Good to
All right,
chat.
good on you.